Our current inventory sits at around 206,000 total pieces of property. It fluctuates obviously with intake and purging at any given time, but that's the last number I believe that was taken right at the first of the year. On average, we do somewhere between 28 to 34,000 pieces a year, sometimes less, sometimes it's more, but the 28 to 34 is a pretty good window for us from year to year.
We store all property that is related to any crime or incident that occurs, whether it's found or safekeeping or related to any violent crime. It's all stored here. And
we store property for the Winston-Salem Police Department and the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office. We have an agreement with them that we store their property as well.
Most common items are probably drugs that are seized, weapons that are seized, more of a found property like wallets or cell phones, stuff that people have lost. We have pretty much anything you can think of we store here or have had it in the past. Everything from some DNA evidence from a homicide to a found wallet on the side of the street. We have everything. Majority of the evidence is stored here at the Beatty Center. It's stored by size of the package or type of package based on where it's stored at, whether it needs to be refrigerated or it can just be put on a shelf, or if it's biohazardous, it's kept in a specific room that's climate controlled.
Whenever we get a piece of property in, it begins the chain of custody for that piece on our end. We get a supplement, we get the property, we inspect it to make sure the supplement's filled out properly. We inspect it to make sure the package is packaged correctly and that everything is signed that needs to be signed. And it starts the chain of custody with us. Once we get it, we run it. We enter it into our system and assign it a number. Once that number is assigned to it, we barcode it. And then once it's barcoded, it goes into our warehouse in its appropriate location depending on what the property actually is.
Evidence management role as far as chain of custody is to have everything organized. Each piece has a specific number that's entered into the system related to each individual case and where it is in the warehouse, so that if an officer comes to get something or needs it, we can pull it up in the computer and know exactly where it's at any given time. Chain of custody is based on who's in possession of the property at any given time. The importance of it shows that if an officer comes to sign out a piece of property, whether it's for investigation purposes or court purposes, that it's tracked and we know where it is at all times. It just shows the integrity of the fact that the property is not tampered with or altered from the time it was initially seized. Based on how each piece of property is stored, as far as evidence tape and packaging and initials and date on packages, can show the court when an item goes to court that it hasn't been tampered with or opened since it was sealed.
It's extremely important that when we get these pieces, everything's filled out properly, that we have all the information about that piece of property, and it's important that we stay on top of that because we're the ones, once it's stored here, we have to locate it. You know, an officer's not going to know where we've stored that piece, so it's important that we keep up with it. We make sure it's put in the right location and we stay on top of that piece as long as it's in our inventory and until it either gets purged, turned over to the court, or released back to the owner depending on the nature of what that piece of property is. So we do a 100% annual inventory, meaning every year we scan every single piece of property in the warehouse that we have. Actually, accreditation only requires that we do 100% inventory every 3 years, but we do it every year. So we try to make sure that we're above any accreditation standard that we could have as far as making sure our property is, we know where it is, it's where it's supposed to be, and if it's been purged, we know it's been purged.
If an officer needs something for court, we request a couple days notice so we can get the property together, especially if it's a large volume of property for a case. They would come, we would actually sign the property out in the computer showing that it's physically going to court with a date and time stamp of when they received it, and then when they return it that day, there's a chain of custody that shows the time and date they've received it at the time they return it. The chain of custody is important because it shows who is in possession of that property at any specific moment and for how long. From the time the property is seized by whoever it's seized by, officer or forensics, from the time it's stored here till it goes to court is the whole chain of custody till the case is complete.
Purging property, we go through, we'll do a file review, making sure that those pieces are eligible to be destroyed, gotten rid of, purged out of the system. And we'll always go through making sure that if there are questions about it eligible to be purged, we'll make sure those are set aside until either those questions are answered or it'll have to wait until the next purge cycle comes through. When the public wants to come pick their property up, usually we'll notify them by mail. They'll have to call us. There's a number on the letter that we send out, and they'll make an appointment with that, whoever's on the other end of that phone. We have a schedule that we keep, and then we get everything ready for those folks when they come in. So usually the return of property is usually a fairly quick process. Certain types of property may tend to take a little longer. In the instance for a firearm, federal law, Title 18, requires that we do a background check on that individual wanting the firearm back. There's some disqualifiers or reasons we couldn't return a firearm. So then we run their information through and then review it. It usually goes through a review of 2 people, and then we would also possibly have a 3rd person review it as well. One other item tends to be funds, seized funds. If we get an order or the funds are scheduled to be returned, we would actually have to request a check through the city finance office, and that usually takes some additional time as well.
Just the ability to help people in a different role than what an officer does. I mean, we still have the gratification of helping citizens without being out there on the street with them.